The fluorescent lights of the Northwood Community Outreach Center flickered, casting a tired, buzzing glow over Imani Carter's desk. It was a familiar sound, the weary heartbeat of a place running on fumes and goodwill. Imani, a social worker with a caseload that defied the 24 hours in a day, typed away, her focus absolute. She was fighting to get a technicality in a grant application overturned, recalling from memory the exact wording from a city ordinance passed 2 years prior, a detail her supervisor had insisted wasn't important. To Imani, every detail was important. It was the difference between a family having heat for the winter or not. She was an archivist of overlooked things. The scuff marks on a child's shoes that spoke of a long walk to school. The slight tremor in a senior's hand as he signed a form. The way a person's eyes darted to the door when asked about their living situation. These were the data points her heart collected, skills that couldn't be quantified on a performance review, but were the very essence of her work. Yet, in the grand scheme of the city's budget, she was just a line item, easily ignored, easily cut. Outside, the sky had turned a bruised purple. The first clap of thunder rattled the center's thin windows, and moments later, the heavens opened. Rain lashed against the glass in a furious, blinding sheet. It was the kind of sudden, violent storm that sent people running for cover. Through the deluge, the front door suddenly burst open, slammed back against the wall by a gust of wind. Standing in the doorway, soaked and trembling, was a young man. He couldn't have been much older than 20, dressed in expensive-looking clothes that were now plastered to his thin frame. His eyes were wide with a terror that seemed disconnected from the storm, as if the real tempest was raging inside his own mind. He didn't speak, just stood shivering, a ghost washed in by the tide. Her colleague, a well-meaning but by-the-book volunteer, immediately started forward. "Sir, we're technically closed. Do you need to call someone?" But Imani saw something else. She saw the vacant stare, the subtle, repetitive motion of his fingers rubbing together. This wasn't someone who was merely lost. This was someone in shock, someone disconnected from the here and now. She rose slowly from her desk, her movements calm and deliberate. "It's okay, Mark. I've got this." She approached the young man not as a problem to be solved, but as a person to be soothed. "Hello," she said, her voice soft. "That's some storm out there. You look frozen. Let's get you a dry towel and something warm to drink." He didn't respond, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere over her shoulder. She gently guided him to a chair, her touch professional but kind. As she wrapped a thick blanket around his shoulders, she noticed his hands. They were pale and still rubbing together. On his wrist was a tarnished silver bracelet, simple but clearly old. It was etched with a peculiar symbol, like a stylized bird intertwined with a key. She filed the detail away, another piece of data in the complex puzzle of the person before her. She didn't know who he was or where he came from, but in that moment, he was just a soul caught in a storm, and she was the one holding the lantern. For 2 hours, Imani sat with the young man, who she learned was named Leo from a faded tag inside his jacket. He never spoke a word, but his trembling slowly subsided under the warmth of the blanket and the hot cocoa she'd made in the staff microwave. The next morning, the mystery of his identity was solved in a blaze of media attention. A news report showed his face under the headline, "Billionaire Van Ce Mrs. Imani felt a knot tighten in her stomach. This was far beyond a simple case of a person in crisis. She did the right thing, contacting the number listed on the news report. The response was unnervingly swift. Within the hour, a black SUV, sleek and silent as a shark, pulled up to the curb. The first person to enter was a man built like a monument. His suit was perfectly tailored, his expression carved from stone. "Marcus Thorne, Vance Family Security," he announced, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the floor. His eyes swept the room, cataloging everything, and when they landed on Imani, they held a flicker of cold assessment. He was followed by a woman who commanded the air around her. Eleanor Vance, Leo's stepmother, was a vision of refined elegance, her grief artfully displayed in the tasteful black of her dress and the single, perfect tear she dabbed from her eye. But her eyes, when they met Imani's, were as cold and hard as diamond. "Leo, darling," she cooed, rushing to her stepson's side. Leo flinched, a barely perceptible motion, but Imani saw it. Eleanor turned her attention to Imani, her smile a thin, brittle thing. "We are so grateful. You must tell me, what can we do to repay you for your trouble?" The word trouble was laced with insinuation, as if Imani's kindness was a calculated transaction. "No repayment is necessary, Mrs. Vance," Imani said, keeping her voice level. "I'm just glad he's safe." Behind the scenes, a very different conversation was taking place in Eleanor's mind. This quiet, observant social worker was a complication she hadn't anticipated. Eleanor and Marcus were the ones who had engineered Leo's disappearance. They had orchestrated a forced overdose at a discreet medical clinic, intending to have him declared mentally incompetent so Eleanor could finally seize control of his formidable trust fund. But Leo had somehow escaped the clinic before the plan was complete. Now, this woman had spent hours with him. What if he'd managed to communicate something? A word, a name. The risk, however small, was unacceptable. This loose end had to be more than tied up, it had to be buried. Mr. Thorne found Leo's wallet in the car. Eleanor said, her voice turning sharp, probing. "It's empty." "Did he offer you anything? For your help?" The question hung in the air, heavy and venomous. It wasn't an inquiry, it was an accusation. Imani felt a chill creep up her spine. "Of course not," she replied, her voice firm. "Has been in a state of shock since he arrived." Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course," she repeated, drawing the words out. She shared a look with Marcus Thorne. A brief, almost invisible exchange that spoke volumes. The plan was already in motion. The narrative was being written. And in this version of the story, Imani Carter was not a good Samaritan. She was a predator. The Vance's countermove was not just swift, it was brutally, terrifyingly efficient. 24 hours after Eleanor Vance's chillingly polite departure, Imani was at home with her younger brother, Jamal, trying to explain the strange encounter when a thunderous knock echoed through their small apartment. It wasn't a friendly knock. It was the sound of authority, of power. When Imani opened the door, she was met with the grim faces of 2 police detectives and, standing behind them like a grim reaper, Marcus Thorne. "Imani Carter," one of the detectives asked, his hand already on his handcuffs. "Yes, what is this about?" Imani's heart hammered against her ribs. "You and your brother are under arrest on suspicion of kidnapping and extortion." The words didn't compute. It was like hearing a foreign language. Kidnapping, extortion. Jamal stepped forward, his face a mask of disbelief. "What are you talking about? This is insane." The detectives were unmoved. "We have a sworn statement from the Vance family. We also have a burner phone recovered from this address with text demanding a ransom. And we have a record of an initial SWIFT transfer of $20,000 to your brother's bank account." Imani stared at them, her mind reeling. A burner phone, a bank transfer. It was a nightmare, meticulously constructed and utterly convincing. She saw Marcus Thorne's faint, cruel smirk and understood. This was the work of Eleanor Vance. This was the price of her kindness. The arrest was a public and humiliating spectacle. Neighbors peered from behind their curtains as Imani and Jamal, stunned into silence, were led out in handcuffs. The scene was a blur of flashing lights, the cold press of steel on Imani's wrists, and the shame that burned hotter than any anger. They hadn't just been accused, they had been erased. Their lives, their reputations, everything they had worked for, was being systematically dismantled by people whose wealth gave them the power to redefine reality itself. The chapter ended not with a fade to black, but with the deafening, final clang of a jail cell door swinging shut. The cold, heavy sound was an exclamation point on Eleanor Vance's vicious sentence. The storybook tale of a kind woman helping a lost boy had been twisted into a sordid headline, and just as the title promised, Imani Carter and her entire family were now in jail, buried under the crushing weight of lies. The walls of the holding cell were a grimy, oppressive gray. Imani sat on the thin mattress, the shock giving way to a cold, simmering rage. Her public defender, a young, overworked man named Ben, had looked at the evidence against her with a defeated sigh. A burner phone, a financial trail, and the sworn testimony of one of the city's most powerful families, he'd said. This is difficult. But as despair threatened to swallow her whole, Imani's greatest, most overlooked skill began to fire. She closed her eyes, shutting out the grim reality of the cell, and focused. She wasn't just a social worker anymore. She was an investigator. She played back the encounter with Leo, frame by frame, detail by detail. The way he flinched from his stepmother. The empty look in his eyes. And the bracelet. She whispered to herself. She could see it perfectly in her mind's eye. The tarnished silver. The strange, intertwining symbol of a bird and a key. During her one phone call, she didn't call a family member to cry. She called her most trusted friend from the center. "Maria, I need you to do something for me. No questions. I need you to search for a logo, a symbol, a bird mixed with a key." She described it with perfect clarity. Meanwhile, in the silent, opulent halls of the Vance mansion, Julian Vance was watching his son. The patriarch, a man accustomed to commanding boardrooms and brokering billion-dollar deals, was now navigating the unfamiliar, terrifying territory of his son's shattered mind. He had initially accepted Eleanor's story, filtered as it was through his own grief and her practiced sorrow. But now, he was seeing things that didn't fit. He saw how Leo, who sat listlessly for hours, would jolt with a primal fear whenever Eleanor or Marcus Thorne entered the room. He saw how, during a news report about the extortion plot, Leo's eyes had fixated on Imani's picture, his expression not of a victim, but of something akin to recognition, a flicker of calm in his turbulent world. The instincts that had made him a titan of industry, the ability to spot a lie, to see the flaw in a perfect presentation, were screaming at him now. This narrative was wrong. He began his own discreet investigation, making quiet calls, pulling on threads. He started with the timeline of Leo's disappearance. It was then that Imani's friend, Maria, having found a match, anonymously tipped off Vance Corporation's internal affairs with the name of the logo, the Serenity Key Wellness Retreat, a high-end, intensely private medical facility known for handling the discreet problems of the ultra-wealthy. When Julian saw the name, the first domino fell. He knew that facility. It wasn't a place for recovery. It was a place where inconvenient people vanished. The whisper of his own doubt, now amplified by the roar of this new evidence, had become deafening. The woman in jail wasn't a criminal, she was the key. The Vance corporate boardroom sat on the 50th floor, a glass-walled sanctuary overlooking the city. It was Julian Vance's kingdom, and it was here he chose to stage his confrontation. He had summoned Eleanor and Marcus Thorne under the pretense of a legal meeting. Imani's public defender, Ben, was also present, along with two of Julian's most loyal corporate attorneys. Eleanor walked in, confident and poised, assuming this was the final nail in Imani's coffin. "Julian, darling, is all this necessary?" Julian didn't answer. He simply gestured to the large screen at the end of the table. He played a security feed from his own home, showing Leo flinching violently as Eleanor approached him the day before. He followed it with the news clip showing Leo's calm recognition of Imani's face. "I have been a fool," Julian began, his voice low and laced with steel. "Blinded by grief and by trust I sorely misplaced." He laid out his findings with the cold precision of a surgeon. The phone records showing dozens of calls between Marcus and the director of the Serenity Key Wellness Retreat. The financial statements revealing Eleanor's deep gambling debts. The testimony of a nurse from the facility who, under the pressure of Julian's investigators, confessed to administering a powerful sedative to Leo on Eleanor's orders. "You weren't trying to save him," Julian said, his gaze locking onto Eleanor. "You were trying to have him declared incompetent to get control of his trust. He escaped your little prison, and you found a scapegoat. An innocent woman whose only crime was showing my son the kindness you never have." Eleanor's composure finally cracked. "This is absurd! That woman is a scheming nobody!" "She?" Julian countered. "That nobody remembered the logo on a bracelet that unraveled your entire lie." The boardroom doors opened. A caregiver wheeled in Leo Vance. He was still fragile, but he was lucid. He looked around the room, his eyes landing on his stepmother. Julian knelt beside his son's chair. "Leo," he said gently, "I know it's hard, but you're safe now. Just tell me one thing. Did that woman, Imani, hurt you?" Leo stared at his father, his brow furrowed in concentration. He shook his head slowly, clearly. "No," he whispered, the word raspy but clear. "Then who did?" Julian asked. Leo's trembling hand lifted, and he pointed a finger directly at Eleanor Vance. His whole body shook with the effort, the trauma, the fear. But his finger did not waver. It was over. The carefully constructed world of lies collapsed into dust. Eleanor sputtered, but there was no escape. Julian had already alerted the district attorney. This time, when the police arrived, they walked past Imani's lawyer and placed their handcuffs on the pristine wrists of Eleanor Vance and Marcus Thorne. Imani and her brother were released that same evening. The charges dropped, accompanied by a formal, public apology from the city. The reunion was a tearful, powerful release of a nightmare held at bay for too long. Weeks later, Julian Vance announced the formation of the Carter Foundation for Community Justice, a multi-million initiative to fund and support under-recognized local heroes. He appointed Imani Carter as its first executive director, giving her not just a job, but a platform to turn her incredible empathy and perception into systemic change, ensuring no one's kindness could ever be weaponized against them again. And so, Imani Carter's journey from an overlooked social worker to a celebrated leader serves as a powerful reminder that integrity is a force that even power and prejudice cannot break. True talent is often found in the quietest corners, and one person's compassion can indeed be the key that unlocks the most suffocating of cages. If this story of resilience and the fight for justice stirred something in you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring narratives about people who turned adversity into triumph. What was the most impactful moment for you?